to boldly go where no one has gone before. All right, well, maybe some people have gone here before, but I'm going to give my rankings for all the Star Trek movies. And in this video, this is part 1. I'm going to do 13 through 8. But first, before we go any further, remember to hit that follow button, subscribe to this channel. And if you like epic fantasy, remember to go into the description and click on that link for a free ebook, all right? So let's do it. Welcome back to Great Stories Change the World. This is the YouTube channel where an author, me, of science fiction and fantasy goes over and reviews different movies and TV shows and things like that and talks about how the story works and the great things about those stories, because I do believe that great stories change the world. And I want to help people do that. I want to help people tell great stories. And today we are going to start talking about the Star Trek franchise in the movies, all right? So when I was a kid, I'm talking probably first grade, maybe kindergarten, first grade. It was the 70s. All right, so just before the movie came out, I was in love with Star Trek. I thought Star Trek was the coolest thing ever, but it came on in syndication. So I didn't see it originally in the 60s, right? It came on in syndication late at night where I was living in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was way past my bedtime when the show came on. But I begged and pleaded my parents that I wanted to stay up so I could watch Star Trek. And man, I just kept bugging them until finally they just said, fine, if you just stop bugging us, we'll let you stay up to watch Star Trek on school nights, right? And I thought, yes, I did it. I'm going to watch Star Trek. And I'm telling you, the first 2 or 3 times I made it through the intro, right? There's a little, the prequel, and then there's the intro and Space, the Final Frontier. I would make it through maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes of that show, and I'd be asleep because I got up early. I was going to school the next day, and I was a kid. And then I just started putting myself to bed and watched it at different times later on in my life or over the summer when I could stay up and watch it. But I loved Star Trek. And so when the movie came out in 1979, I was there. And even though I was young and I was little, man, my parents were Star Trek fans, my mom especially. And so we went to the movie theater to see Star Trek, the motion picture. And that just continued my love of Star Trek through The Next Generation and Voyager and Deep Space Nine and through a lot of the modern stuff too. I've always loved Star Trek, but especially the original, and I was a huge fan of The Next Generation as well. So we're going to get into the movies here, and I'm going to do 13 through 8, all right? Because there are 13 total movies, and I'm just not going to have time to do one video on all 13 movies. So this is going to be part 1, where I'm going to do number 13 through number 8, all right? So on number 13, we have The Final Frontier. This came out in 1989, and William Shatner directed this. Now, just as a quick aside, there are a couple great books, and I've been listening to them on Audible, or I have listened to them on Audible. One on the movie memories and memories from the TV show. They're 2 separate books by William Shatner, and they have a lot of great information in those books. And so, but this movie, particularly The Final Frontier, William Shatner directed. And let me just tell you, this is an awful movie. Now, there are still some great moments between the characters because by this point, this is Star Trek V. And by this point, the cast and the movies, and they have a lot of the characters sort of down. And so the banter and the jokes and some of the things that they were doing were still kind of cool, and it's entertaining, and especially if you're a Star Trek fan. But as a movie, this is an awful movie. You can just tell the budget is low. You can just tell some things aren't working out, and there's some plot problems. And this is all about Sybok, Spock's brother, and how he's now this mystic and he's searching to find God, and they go into this part. There's just so much of this particular movie that was new, and it wasn't really connected as much with the whole sort of universe. There were some interesting elements to it, though. I like the ambassadors that were kind of they were kidnapped by Sybok, and from the Klingons to the Romulans to you know the Federation guy, the human guy, and there was some interesting sort of interplay there. And the theme though was sort of not really that clear, and it was rushed, and again the ending was just really awful. Okay. That's number 13. Number 12, we have Star Trek Insurrection. This came out in 1998, and Jonathan Frakes directed this one, and it was written by Rick Berman, and he was kind of in charge of this. He didn't really write the whole thing, but you know, a lot of the Star Trek Next Generation writers and that team. Now, this came out after First Contact, which was hugely successful and popular, but this one is similar to The Final Frontier in that it's more of an episode sort of story that they put on as a movie, okay? So, you know, when you do a movie, like the themes have to be epic, like all this stuff has to be epic. And so therefore, you know, when you're looking at these things, you want the movie to be epic, and yet there are a few times within the Star Trek movie universe where they just kind of have an episode sort of small stakes sort of idea that they try to expand into a more epic idea, and it just doesn't work. And this is one of those. So in Insurrection, even though Jonathan Frakes is a pretty good director and he did a great job with First Contact, you know, this just kind of didn't work, and it had some story problems, and it was a little low budget here and there. And so this was kind of the beginning of the end, and they probably should have just kind of let it go after this, although they did another one. So that was number 12. Number 11 is the next one in the Next Generation movie series, is Nemesis, that came out in 2002. And by this time, man, the cast was really looking old, okay? And the biggest problem was with Data, right? You know, he's supposed to be this android, and yet they don't explain it, or you just kind of have to suspend your belief that he's looking a lot older and overweight, and he's just looking older. There's nothing bad with that. It's just he's not the same. He doesn't look the same as he did at the beginning of the TV show, which is kind of a problem for an android, right? This was also a little lower budget. There was some cool space battle stuff, and I kind of like the theme. This is why this one is at number 11 and not further down. I kind of like the theme of, you know, Picard and his clone, and some of the stuff with Data and his you know, sort of the other, you know, Data that they had from Dr. Noonien Singh or whatever his name. And this had Tom Hardy in it. This was a young Tom Hardy, man. This is before he kind of beefs up, and he's in this. And so this one entertains me, but it's still not that great of a movie, and you can kind of see why they just kind of called it quits for the Star Trek universe in the movies after this one. Number 10, we have Star Trek Beyond. This came out in 2016. So a guy by the name of Justin Lin directed it, which I was kind of excited about, kind of a new director. Simon Pegg kind of goes into some different writing, responsibilities with this one, and he's a pretty decent writer. But again, you can probably say this about all of these at the bottom of my list. The stories are more of an episode than they are a movie. If you're going to do a movie, man, you've got to really give us something different, something epic, where characters really grow. And Star Trek Beyond is the third of kind of the reboot timeline with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, and the cast is great. And there are some really interesting moments. One of the things I loved about this movie was they put Spock and Dr. McCoy together and kind of had them in some conflict and made them work together. And I really thought that was a great thing, especially because they didn't really delve into that as much in the reboot. You know, they gave a lot more time to Uhura, which I loved. I thought that was actually a really cool thing in the reboot series. But you know, although this movie wasn't as great, and it's kind of anticlimactic in a lot of ways. That part I really liked, that they really kind of put those two characters together, and that's what you want as a writer. You want to put characters together who don't get along, or who have conflict of some sort, and they have to work together, and they have to work through their differences, and then learn how to use their differences or whatever, right? It's kind of a trope, but it worked in this. That part of it worked in this movie, and I liked a lot of the visuals, and a lot of it was cool. But you can kind of see why this one was the last of the reboot series. Not to mention that the guy who played Chekhov died right before the movie came out. So a lot of things that were kind of going against this one. J.J. Abrams wasn't as involved, and so that's Star Trek Beyond. In 2016. That was number 10. And number 9, we have the motion picture from 1979. Here it is. Here it comes. Now, one really interesting things that I kind of didn't really know, and as I was listening to the books and stuff, like I was talking about with William Shatner, Alan Dean Foster really had a lot to do with the writing of this story and the writing of the script and kind of helping to move this movie go forward. So this was the first movie, and let me just tell you, a lot of people would probably put this movie way lower on the list, because this is also probably one of those where the storyline is more of an episode storyline, right? And it's not, they try to make it epic as if like they're going to destroy the world or destroy Earth or whatever. They try to make it epic in a certain way, but it kind of doesn't work. And I'm telling you, Captain Decker, he plays the ultimate red shirt. Okay, so if you watch this movie, if you know the sort of the formula that people make fun of with the original Star Trek series, is that the red shirts would die. You know, like you knew, like if Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy and Spock or whoever these guys were, if they went to the planet to do whatever investigation and some red shirt went with them, that red shirt guy was going to die. A monster was going to eat him or something else. And by the way, that's a great book by John Scalzi. If you've never read it, Red Shirts, it's hilarious. It's so amazing. And so, but Captain Decker is kind of the ultimate red shirt, right? And again, this is an episode that if you had done this in 40 minutes, it would have been cool. But, you know, it was such a mess. The movie is such a mess. But I'm putting it higher on my list because I have such amazing memories of this movie. I mean, when you're a kid and you see Star Trek on the big screen and the effects are cool, and yes, it's so super boring now when you watch it. Like it doesn't kind of translate to the modern era. The effects don't, and they're so boring of just moving through the V'ger stuff, and I get it. But really the characters don't really grow that much in this one. And so again, there's a lot of problems with this, and I could totally understand if someone put this one at number 13. But for me, it was so exciting to have these guys on the big screen, and I just remember that. And there was parts of it that were cool. But here we go. That's my number 9, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, 1979. Finishing out this video at number 8, we have Star Trek Into Darkness. All right. And this is the second of the reboot series, and this came out in 2013. And this had J.J. Abrams, and it was written by Orci and Kurtzman, a lot of the same guys that did the first movie, the reboot. It's got a lot of Easter eggs. It's got a lot of connections with the original series and the other movies, because, you know, they're kind of now on this separate timeline, so they can play with a lot of that stuff. They don't have to, you know, sort of introduce things and do it in such a way that make people mad because it wasn't just like it was in the show. They can kind of mention some things and do some things, but because it's a different timeline, they had some creativity to it. So Into Darkness was sort of a remake of The Wrath of Khan, or Space Seed, which was in the original 3 seasons of Star Trek in the 60s. And so it plays a lot of that, you know, and overall, I think this is a great movie. I think the stuff that they did play with, they did well. I think J.J. Abrams did a great job kind of pulling a lot of stuff in, and so much of it was fun. And you had Dr. Carol Marcus is introduced. And so a lot of those things are really cool. I do have one main criticism of this movie. I love Benedict Cumberbatch. I love him, Sherlock, and I've seen him in so many things that I just love him as an actor. I think he does a great job. But I really would have liked to have seen a great Indian actor or a person of color of some sort be Khan in this one. To be Khan, they kind of mess with it a little bit, but I really would have liked to have seen someone. Ricardo Montalban was cast in the 60s because they got away with that stuff. He's just foreign. Like, all foreigners could be any other foreigner in like the 60s, and it was really sort of bad. It was really awful. But they got to, but Ricardo Montalban, did such a great job in The Wrath of Khan and all that sort of stuff. But this was a great opportunity to maybe, sort of look at it and have another person of color in there to really give a strong performance. And it was, they made it a complex character. They made Khan a more complex character, and I enjoyed that. But I really would have liked to have seen, like I said, a person of color in that. So that was my number 8. So that was 13 through 8, right? Final Frontier, Insurrection, Nemesis, Beyond, the motion picture, and then now with Into Darkness, we're getting into some better movies. Again, those first 5 there were more episodes that they kind of turned into movies, but now with Into Darkness and with the top 7 that I'm going to do next week, you can see more that they have epic stories, and they were and character development and all sorts of things that really made them great movies. And Into Darkness had that, and that's where you sort of start with those sort of ideas and how they're great movies. All right, so there'll be a lot more great movies on the list next week. Remember to subscribe to this channel, and that will help me out a lot. And also remember to get that free ebook if you like epic fantasy, okay? So until next week, peace out. To boldly go where no one has gone before. Part 2 of my Star Trek movie rankings coming up next. Remember to go into the description and click that link for a free ebook, and follow and share and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let's do it. Welcome back to the YouTube channel, Great Stories Change the World. Today I'm going to get back to my Star Trek movie rankings. And, I believe that great stories do change the world. We should tell great stories, and we should learn how to tell great stories, because not everybody knows how. And so that's what this channel is all about. And we're going to be getting back to my Star Trek movie rankings here, where we kind of go over the second half of my list. If you go back to the first video, I did numbers 13 through 8. And in this video, we're going to go over 7 through number 1. So these are going to be the better ones, obviously, at least in my opinion. And I really want to hear your feedback. So let me know in the comments how you feel about my list, my rankings, where I rank certain things. Something I didn't talk about in the last video was about Gene Roddenberry. If you go through some writings, and I mentioned William Shatner's books, Memories, Star Trek Memories, and Movie Memories. Those 2 books, really insightful about Gene Roddenberry and who he was, and kind of how he developed Star Trek and why, and just Star Trek was his brainchild. And he did the TV show, but then when you get into the movies, it was a really difficult relationship between Paramount and Gene Roddenberry. And he goes over this in these books, especially the second book, Movie Memories, where, leading up to the movies, there had been, a lot of tension between the stars of the TV show, especially Leonard Nimoy, and other people, and Paramount, just trying to move forward and make good movies. But Gene Roddenberry had all these kind of crazy ideas, and he really wanted to do this weird time travel movie where they went back in time and had to make sure that JFK really was assassinated or something like that, which is really interesting because Stephen King kind of had a movie, a book like that they ended up making a show about. I haven't seen the show, but the book was really interesting by Stephen King. All that to say is Gene Roddenberry had all these crazy ideas, and he never got to have his ideas come to fruition in the movies because Paramount and other writers and directors and producers would kind of try to work with him, but then realize he didn't know how to make a good movie. Like they were trying to make a movie that really engaged people and yet still kept the heart of Star Trek. And so when we're getting into some of these really good movies, then, Gene Roddenberry really wasn't as involved. Unfortunately, he was really involved in the TV show, and of course, when the budget went down, and then they got canceled. And really, he was a genius level guy in a lot of ways, but some of in his later life, there was a lot of tension between directors and producers because Gene Roddenberry didn't have full control on the movie side, but he really wanted a lot of input, and the input wasn't always, welcome. So it's kind of a sad story in a way because as a writer, right, you want to have control over your property, and if someone else is going to go, make a movie out of it, then you would really like for that to be something you really believe in. And he didn't really kind of get that. But at the same time, we have a lot of really great Star Trek movies, and I think they did kind of maintain the heart of the idea of Star Trek and the characters especially that kind of move forward in the movies. And ironically, or maybe not, I'm going to start here with number 7, where we deal with the reboot. So on number 7, we deal with kind of the reboot with J.J. Abrams. And I went over this in the last video about how this was one of the original ideas about doing movies, like maybe go back at some point, especially as the original cast was getting older, maybe go back, recast them as young people, and do some sort of Academy TV show or something like that. Well, they kind of took that idea and obviously adapted it to a great degree with the Star Trek reboot in 2009. Now, there hadn't been a Star Trek movie in, 10 years or so since Nemesis. And Nemesis wasn't one of the best. I like Nemesis, but it wasn't one of the best movies from Star Trek. And so in 2009, they get J.J. Abrams involved. And we all make fun of this movie because of lens flares, and so this is kind of an origin story with Star Trek. And what I really like about this one is they didn't try to fit it into the original timeline. Yes, there's time travel. There's 4 or 5, almost half of these movies deal with time travel, and which is kind of lazy if you ask me. But at the same time, this was really interesting because instead of trying to fit this reboot into the original timeline and trying to kind of do a prequel sort of thing, which they have done in a certain sense with on Paramount Plus in one of the new Star Trek TV shows with Captain Pike. But instead of doing that, and having all those limitations, right? Because you were going to have all sorts of limitations as far as you can't kill this person, you can't do that. And that really kind of messes up the stakes. It messes up the characters. It really limits you in what you can do. And so therefore, what they did is they kind of used this time travel to make this alternate timeline where the old Spock has to come, or he gets sucked into the black hole and he comes back, and there's all this stuff. And so that really allowed them to stay true to Star Trek, but freed them in a lot of ways to really give big stakes. Like, we don't know, are people going to die? They blow up Vulcan and they do all this stuff to kind of give us this idea they could do some really major things here. So they give us stakes, and these are more action adventure movies, or they aren't as much Star Trek movies, but they really do have kind of the core idea of it, and the core characters are there, and I liked it. I thought it was a good movie, and that is my number 7. All right. So here at number 6, in 1986, we have The Voyage Home. Now, this is Star Trek 4. And so when we're looking at the different movies, this kind of completed the trilogy. And part of the reason that Star Trek has success with the movies, and we'll get to a couple of the other ones later on, with Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and then The Voyage Home, is they were telling one continuous story and yet putting it in movies, but they weren't episodic. They weren't episodes. They were still really kind of epic movies. Now, The Voyage Home has the lowest budget, and you can tell they do a lot on the streets of San Francisco, and so they don't have to have as much of the big budget, Star Trek budget, that maybe some of the other movies had. But this was a really interesting choice of something to do for a movie, because you had two really epic stories with Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock, and all these big things happen and people die and big stakes. And the movies needed a lighthearted sort of shift in tone, because this is what you want to do as a writer. You want to, after these big moments, you know, if you have more and more big moments, the audience gets tired, right? The audience gets kind of weary of what you're doing. And so you need to kind of have some time to process. And as much as the main idea of the movie was kind of cheesy, they did a really good job with that in this movie, where they kind of pulled these people together. They had a mission, but there was a lot more interplay with some of the characters, and I thought actually it really worked for that reason. You know, the whole whales and the environmentalist thing, and you know, where, you know, we all want the environment to be good, and I'm not saying I'm against that, but it was more agenda driven in the idea. But you know, Nimoy does a great job again with the directing, and it was his idea, and there was just some great stuff that happened in the movie and the characters in it, and it's still very entertaining and a great Star Trek movie. So that's number 6. At number 5, we have Star Trek Generations. Now, this was in 1994, and David Carson was a director, and he was from the TV show Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, Roddenberry had a lot to do with the inception of The Next Generation. So when Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock and these movies were just exploding, you know, he had the cachet again to do a TV show, which is really more his heart. That was really more his what he wanted to do. That was more his vision, was to do TV shows. And that was his expertise. And so he pulls in a new Star Trek show and new characters, and does some interesting things, and brings Klingon on, you know, the Enterprise, and you know, there's more of a peacetime with the Klingons and the Federation now, and all of this sort of stuff. And it was a great TV show. So you know, when that show was kind of ending its run and it was supremely popular, then they decided to start doing movies. So they started to try to transition from the original cast, which was getting old, and they needed to kind of be done, and the movies were still good and probably making money, but they wanted to transition into this other cast as the TV show kind of ran its course. So this is what they did. You've got Kirk and Spock, you know, on a mission together to save a planet with billions of people. And, you know, the basic storyline is good. It's not amazing, but really they did a great job, you know, kind of pulling this together, doing some character stuff with Data, with Picard, doing some stuff with Kirk, and giving him a good ending, right? So, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, Kirk dies at the end. But this was a great transition between the two movies, and I love this movie. It was a great movie, really well done. A lot of the cast and the crew and the creatives from, you know, what was really a great last few years from the TV show were a part of this movie, and they did a great job. All right, and so here, coming in at number 4, we've got The Search for Spock. Now, this is Star Trek 3. Now, Wrath of Khan was, you know, hugely successful, and it kind of found a great, you know, formula, a great sort of mix and recipe for a great Star Trek movie. And, you know, they kind of set it up for some possibilities of bringing Spock back, and so they kind of had to come up with this mystic religious element for Spock to come back, and he gave his soul to McCoy, which I really thought was a great choice. Like that it was McCoy that he gave his soul to, and they had to use, to get McCoy to here and go get the new Spock from the Genesis planet. I thought it was really well set up because, Kirk and McCoy, Spock and McCoy always had this sort of tension between them, and they were always arguing, and they were foils of one another character-wise. And it made for great TV and great character engagement. So the fact that, Bones had his soul was perfect, poetic irony. And all of that together was amazing. The writing was good. The stakes were big. They blow up the Enterprise. Kirk's son dies. Again, it's another epic movie that really focuses on the characters and friendship and all of those things. And this is Nimoy's first crack at directing, and he did an amazing job. I really thought he did a phenomenal movie. I'm going to be saying this a lot in this video because this is, the top 7. Crew's all back, and they, Worf had gone on to do some stuff in Deep Space Nine, and so they bring him back, and it's kind of a fun way. Really well done movie overall, and a lot of really interesting interactions, but then it's not just the Borg. They're dealing with the Borg along with dealing with the beginning of space travel. I think his name was Cochrane, Zefram Cochrane, or whatever his name was. He was the first warp guy. The guy came up with warp and led to the first contact between humans and aliens. And it was just great all around. I mean, the movie flowed well. The different storylines kind of worked together well. And, this is one of the best. Like, it's still a great movie, very entertaining. And the character development through, a lot of the movie, especially with Picard, because it was a Borg and things like that, was really well done. All right. So number 2, we have, some people might be surprising. Some people might have put maybe First Contact number 2, but I'm going to put at number 2, The Undiscovered Country. Now this is Star Trek 6, but here at number 2 is what I think is one of the best, obviously, Star Trek movies. Star Trek 5, as I put, way back there on my list, was not a good movie. It was really a bad movie. The only thing that makes that movie entertaining is some of the interplay and character stuff with Kirk and Spock and Bones. But it's really sort of, it really is a bad, low-budget movie. But they decided to go out with one more movie. They decided, well, we'll do one more because it's still going to make money no matter what we do. But I really have to give them some credit because they could have just kind of phoned it in and done a really bad movie, but they didn't. What they did was they got everybody back together. They did there was a murder mystery, and this was kind of like influenced by the falling of the wall and communism and the Russians and and the West, Soviets in the West kind of learning how to live in peace. And so this is a really great movie. It's got a great theme, great characters. And you really, and of course, Kirk is the one who has to go and kind of try to make peace. And he's got all this history with the Klingons. They killed his son. And this movie is just really great. It's got a great space battle. It's got some great elements to it that just make it a perfect, in my opinion, it's actually a perfect Star Trek movie because there's all the different elements of great sci-fi and the characters, and they just went out, the original cast went out with a bang, in my opinion, and this is a great movie. So that's number 2. Number 1 would not surprise anybody. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, is the best Star Trek movie. I don't need to go into all of it, but Paramount really, it wasn't necessarily a flop, but the first movie wasn't received super well. Star Trek people are going to come back, but you know, they really kind of, that's when they started to kind of edge Roddenberry out more and try to bring in more people. A couple of people like Harve Bennett, like they didn't really know that much about Star Trek. So they learned a lot about Star Trek and then really tried to make a great epic movie. And so they take Space Seed, which is one of the episodes, I think, from season 1. Anyway, it's in there. One of the first 2 seasons, Space Seed, and they brought back Ricardo Montalban, who plays an amazing villain. Some parts are cheesy, right? Khan, you know, and there's all this stuff. But it's really a great movie. They give us a space battle. And there's a lot of interplay character between Kirk and you know, Ricardo Montalban, who plays Khan, and of course the ending is epic. Again, great stories are all about stakes. What's at stake? Whether is it a friendship? Is it peace? Is it and man, you got to give us some stakes. And here in this movie, Spock dies. Right? There are consequences, there are stakes, and there's a cost. And so this movie is amazing. That scene at the end between Kirk and Spock, people said, you know, they were crying when they filmed it. The crew was crying when they filmed it, and then they cried when they watched it back, just to edit it through. Like we cared so much about these characters. They did such a great job pulling this movie together. So that is my list. Star Trek Wrath of Khan, #1. You let me know what you think of this list, what you think of my list, my top 7 or my top 13. And remember to like, follow, subscribe, comment, tell me what you think. And I will see you next time on Great Stories Change the World. All right, see you later.